Hi, my name is Femi. This is my reflection in color.
Hi, and welcome to the newest episode of Reflections in Color. My name is Ewune Wane, and I am the founder of Minds Over Melanin. Today, we have a new guest with us. He goes by the name of Femi Olukoya. He has a master's in education. He is a licensed professional counselor and is certified by the National Counseling Certification. He's been practicing in the field for 10 years. He's experienced a vast range of cultures in different countries and societies, and he prides himself in multicultural practicing. He's a military vet. Thank you for your service.
No
And,
problem.
and he's very grateful for these experiences because they've led him to be the best husband, father, brother, relative, and friend he could possibly be. He would love to be given a chance to do the same for you in a safe, non-judgmental space. Femi, welcome to Reflections in Color.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. It's exciting.
Absolutely. So today we will be discussing Black masculinity and mental health.
Oof. Oof. Yeah.
So thank you for being here to give us an insight to this because you are a Black male and I am not. And so your expertise is highly appreciated.
No problem. It's a wide range of what it is to be, an African American or a Black man, in this society. When it comes to mental health, there's a lot of things that has been overlooked, when it comes to dealing with people that look like me, right? We're bred to, take things in, take care of business or, just have a hard shell, talking about feelings is not something that, we comfortably do, and I kind of advocate on making it okay, having a safe place for, people that look like me to be able to share, to be able to express their emotions, to be able to unpack things that may help them out in dealing with relationships, fatherhood, partner, being the best, member of the family or be an asset to the family instead of a liability, right? So there's, like I said before, there's a wide range of what men do go through.
Absolutely. Yes. Being a person in and of itself is complex. And when we consider all the social identities that people carry, like being a husband or a brother or a friend, a provider, a father, the list goes on, that's different concepts that they're kind of viewing their lives through. So you kind of got us started on the first question, which is, in your own words, how would you define Black masculinity?
So based on speaking to other men and, having these sessions with them and just seeing where they come from, what I've observed and what I've experienced from them are really seeing that, and you probably heard this before, like the unconditional love or unconditional appreciation that other things or other entities like women, children get, men don't typically get that, especially Black men. So it's kind of one of those situations where you are loved or you are appreciated contingent on what you provide, right? I don't know if you've heard that before, but I've been hearing that a lot lately when it comes to males and especially Black males, where, my experience, my partner or my child or my relatives or family members are pretty much saying, what can you do? Or did you get a job? Are you contributing? What are you doing? Right? instead of being like, okay, you're a deadbeat dad, why can't you get this job? Or, I'm holding you down. Why are you making me do this and stuff like that? But it's one of those situations where you have to be able to, especially in my culture, you have to be able to be the breadwinner or bring something to the table in order to be noticed and be respected and actually have some type of emotional tie.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay,
I don't know
I
if that,
have heard that. To
yeah,
answer your question, I have heard that. Personally, I don't agree. That's not how I view the men in my family. But I do respect that perspective. I can see how someone would get to that point where their contributions or their value, is contingent on certain aspects of relation to another person and not just them as a independent entity.
yeah. And that's just one aspect of it too. Like, it's not necessarily my ideal, but it's just what it's been expressed to me. Um, Also, dealing with society, being a Black man in this country, there are other things that you also have to deal with that's not, family related or domestically related too. Like when it comes to the workplace, and I know Black women also feel the same burden, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to dealing with law enforcement, when it comes to dealing with, you know, like friends that are not African American or don't share those that pigmentation. It's one of those things where you're always constantly fighting. You're always constantly proving yourself to the point where like it could be a detriment to your fellow Black men, because I have, based on my experience, I have a lot of situations where I've dealt with people that look just like me, give me a harder time because they worked really hard to get to where they are, that they're a little bit harder. They're a little bit colder when it deals with, let's say, for example, I'll give you an example.
Yes, please.
I'll give you an example. So, like based on, let's do current affairs, like when it comes to police officers and African American males, right? Now, I'm you can't take away the situation of what's going on. You can't ignore it, right? Because it's really obvious.
Yeah.
And based on some experiences, I get more issues or more, how do I put it? I get more flack from people that look like me because they want to prove a point than people that don't look like me.
Are you
And
saying that you get more flack from Black officers and white officers?
yes, and that's the thing. I'm not saying that's all the time, but I'm saying that's a good percentage that has to be looked at, right? Um, and it's not entirely their fault. It's just something that they were conditioned to be because they had to work so hard to get to the level that they are, that they don't want it taken away from them. Hence the reason why it affects other people. So when it comes to hearing them, when it comes to, seeing their perspective of how they feel about the situation, or how they feel like, hey, if I can do this, why can't you do the same thing? Or just having conversations with each other, opening up, those issues don't happen as much as it's happening now.
So you said something we don't bring a lot of attention to because typically when people hear of a Black person giving another Black person Black who is in a power of authority, they call them like an Uncle Tom or a coon and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would like to bring to their attention is that racism is a system and it lives and breathes. And the system lives and breathes based on the people who uphold it. And Black people do uphold racist systems. We also support, anti-Blackness policies or not even just policies that are formal, but even cultural anti-Blackness. And I pause to identify them as self-hating versus one, this is the fruit of the tree of white supremacy, one. And two, it can also be a form of survival,
Okay.
right? Like in the workplace, like you said, there's discrimination and there's a lot of pressure. And most people want to do well, or they want to succeed, or even at minimum provide for their families, because that's something that's expected of them. And if this is the way that I have to do it in order to accomplish ABC, then I'll do that. It's complex. It's complex, but I try to see it as more than an internal thing versus looking at all the systems that are at play and the person within that system. And so we began from the micro level to the macro level. Like, what are all the situations that this person is in? Getting back to the, social identities, and how do they kind of navigate that? And so in a situation like a Black officer who has like a white officer cop, for example, and he's trying to, demonstrate some type of authority or give an extra flack, right? One way could be to see it as, this person is supporting racist notions. Another thing could be like, if he doesn't do this, what happens to him?
Exactly. And I completely agree with you. You know, um, that's where you have to know where the motivation lies, right? And this is where, talking about these issues come in, where men are, especially Black men, are able to express their feelings or express their motivation on, this is why I act this way. This is why I'm treating another brother this way. This is why. This is my motivation. These are the things that I see that I want to discount. Like a guy could be like, hey, I'm really trying to stop the stereotype of how they see us. So this is what I would like you to do as well, because I feel like I'm doing the same thing. This is where opening up as a Black man comes in, because there's a little bit more understanding. It's funny when you mentioned the Uncle Tom situation. I really don't believe in that, because I feel like there are layers, right? There are people's experiences. When you generalize, it's the worst thing you could ever do, right? So that definition or that title should be stripped, because basically it's not a color thing and it's not a societal. It's more of like the way you were brought up, the values that you were brought up in does not make you that particular label. So if you can actually open up, just like the other person can open up, and you can have these conversations like, hey, this wasn't provided to me growing up. I'm not familiar with this. And this guy, that's in a situation that you would like to be in, you start having conversations. We as a society don't do that when it comes to our demographic. It's more of a competition than an actual, hey, I'm gonna help you out. Are you gonna help me out? What can we do to help each other out, right? So that's the reason why I advocate for like more therapy or openness to therapy with our demographic, because you can unlock so many things by just communicating and actually showing some type of vulnerability to open up.
Absolutely. I want you to hold that thought, so I want to come back to it, but I
Right.
want to comment on the comment that you made about competition. And so when I thought about that, I was like, competition, crabs in a barrel, right? And I know that people of African descent, people who identify as Black, often get a lot of flack for the lack of community. I still think it's a pretty strong community within Black people for the most part, but I don't think we consider the systems. The systems are so important, because we like to look at one another as individuals, but in this system, we're actually kind of grouped together. And the competition is because there are limited slots.
True.
That's a matter of fact. There's
That is
only
true.
3 spots. There's 30 of us going for it. They have created a competition amongst us. And when I say they, is the majority, those who are in power. And forgetting that Black people don't have any power, literally. And we're forced to participate in what is given to us. So if we're given scraps, we're going to fight for it because we have nothing. And so when we consider the competition, I just like people to remember the systems that are at play, and not so much blame it on that person or who they are or what their values are, but more so see like, we're actually in survival. And when you're in survival, you're going to behave differently. People think about crabs in a barrel, and if you've seen it, you see them like dragging them down when the ones are trying to climb out. others are trying to drag them down. And no one remembers, like, that's not where they're supposed to be. If the crabs are in their natural environment, they're not fighting amongst each other to that degree. Yes, there's still fights. I've seen crab fights, but it's nowhere along the lines of that because they have space and they're doing their own thing. And so when you put them in this confined space and you make freedom very difficult to get, that's when that competition comes into play. And so we apply that to the Black community. I hope that gives people more empathy a little bit, to not view this person as, I mean, I know it's going to happen, but I just want to put that out there that this isn't your competitor, so to speak, but it happens because of how we've been placed in society and not because we have a disdain for one another.
Okay. Yeah, I do agree with you to a certain extent. Like when you say like the power aspect of not having it, I feel like we actually do have the power, but we don't utilize it. When it comes to consuming power, we have that. When it comes to creative power, we have that. It's one of those situations where, I'll give an example. Let's say Asian communities, right? Like, before that dollar doesn't circulate in that community, it's so much longer than an actual Black community. Now, when it comes to, like, yes, we are a community, but we also need to make a system of our own, right? So let's say, like, supporting each other, and that also can be hard, but it's everything that comes, like, when it's hard, it's worth it. It's supposed to be hard. It may not even like happen in our generation, but we have to continue working on that, right? Having that same community, having that same system work for us. I'll give an example. Look at Black Panther. A lot of people didn't know about comic books or anything about Black Panther, but they showed up. Yeah. They showed up for that movie, and that blew up. That's the buying power that I'm saying, to the point where, like, people are trying to, tap into that, consumer rate. We have it. We just have to be able to be open-minded and accept that it's not about us. Being selfless is very important. Dealing with other people, Black businesses, and like, Black services and stuff like that is what we have to do. The power is there. We could create a community of our own and actually have our own economy. It's just that we have a hard time doing that. Like Crabs in the Barrel, yes, and you're right, because they did create that. They do create limited spaces for us to be there, but we don't actually have to be in that space. We could create our own. I mean, Tyler Perry did it, so it's so yeah, so it's
that's a good
yeah, you just have to create it. And this brings me, I don't want to, like, this brings me to, like, across the ocean to Africa, right? When it comes to resources, the things that we learn here as an African community, as an African American community, the things that we learn here, and the technology and fighting our way to a certain position, we can take and use that in Africa, to the point where, like, it's so much resources in Africa, and there's so much, like, brains when it comes to African Americans and Africans, like, diaspora. Like, we can create something magical. We can actually really create another UAE, which is, Dubai. It can happen, but we just have to realize that we have our own stuff. Why can't we build there? Even if you feel like your ancestors aren't from there, it doesn't matter. You look just like me, so you could actually, it's just, it'll be fine. When you can push through that, that unity has to be there. And the reason why we're not growing or we're not winning this, it's not even about winning, if we're not excelling in this race, is because we still are not seeing each other as relatives. I don't know.
So,
that's my
story. We're going to come back to that on another episode.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, yeah.
It's a whole nother episode, but at risk of sounding like a broken record, and I will carry that bag for today, um, I don't want to put too much blame on us.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's the full picture
Okay.
because these systems are powerful. They're powerful. So we mentioned, the Asian community. Um, they haven't had the same history that Black people have had in this country, and that is so important.
Okay.
So important to consider because when you think about Jim Crow, for example, redlining, for example, redistricting, that might be like redlining.
Yeah.
But the
It's
efforts
a
that still exist today,
yeah.
Because they don't experience the higher rates of interest for mortgages, for business loans. They're more likely to get a business loan than a Black person. It's very difficult and the process isn't clear. And there have been several companies, even as of today, that have had a systemic history of declining Black people loans. So all those small things, that hurts us, that impacts us. Or even, you as a vet, I'm sure you know about the housing discrimination for Black vets
Yeah.
and how that was one of the ways the middle class really built itself, where the white vets were able to come back, were able to get those grants to get the housing, and that was one way they established their wealth. And that wasn't given to Black vets. And so when I think about what we can do, I don't want to forget the systems and not to be a Debbie Downer, but I just don't want people to think that this is all their fault because it's not.
Yeah,
So
you're
that's
right. It's not. I'm not saying it is, but what I mean is like there's always going to be a force against you, right? So you just have to arm. We just feel like we have to arm ourselves with the right type of weapons to overcome, right? And I feel like we are doing a good job overall. You know, like as the decades go, we are steady making progression. It's not fast enough, but we are steady, getting in these situations where it's like we are in positions of making decisions and dealing with things.
I think
Just like
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, just like me saying, I'll put it into like an individual therapy type of session. When I tell people, you cannot control how people act, you can't control how people, talk to you or treat you, but you can control how it makes you feel, and you can control how you can overcome it, right? Where thinking about certain ways to overcome that situation, because it's going to happen regardless, right? People are going to hurt your feelings. People are going to be, a triggering factor for you. They're going to be stressors, but how do you kind of like weather that storm to be successful instead of letting it break you down, creating weapons, right? And I bring that to the wider range of things, like they're going to keep doing what they're doing, right? How are we going to deal with that? What weapons are we going to create to deal with that, to overcome it? But before we overcome it, how are we going to let it dismantle us, push us down? No, we got to worry about our system, our relationships, our unity, so it can better deal with the inevitable stuff that's going to happen that we cannot control.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's the way I see it. So I'm not trying to say like, hey, it's our fault. It's our fault. No, it's not. But we can double down and, have that same type of mentality where like, hey, we just got to push through. We can't make excuses. We can't play victim. We just have to really figure out how to fight back in a way where it's not excluding, but also inclusive.
I hear you. Okay. So let's pull a little bit back to the mental health aspect.
All right.
Let's kind of talk about your perception of mental health before you became a provider.
Okay.
How did you view mental health?
All right. So before I got into the field, so I was in the military, and we were, I think it was a time of war. It was Iraqi freedom, and I was 18. Got shipped to the Gulf because I kind of got out of the military 9/11, 2001. That's when it happened. So instead of me going to Hawaii, they sent me to the Gulf at 18. So we did a lot of, I was on an aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz. We did a lot of battle stations. So there's a lot of people that really jumped off the boat. They jumped off that ship because they couldn't handle the pressure of being out to sea for like a long period of time. So I dealt with a lot of suicidal shipmates where we had to get out the water, right? So I was in deck department. We helped out the star swimmers and everything. We put the boat down to go get them and everything like that. So every time they come up, they would take them to the chaplain. I had a couple of people that kind of didn't make it because of suicide. So it's one of those situations that kind of got me into mental health when I got out of the military. But how I saw mental health, really, I thought it was just me talking to people. Like, oh yeah, I was just getting paid to talk to people. And, I didn't realize it was more about, it's about 30-40% like having conversations with individuals, then the rest is paperwork. Oh my God. So that's really what I thought. I was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna sit down and have conversations with people. I'm really good with people. So I feel like, this is like an ideal job, but I didn't realize that I would actually, be taken, because energy is transferable. So like whatever my patients or my clients are telling me, I take it in because I help you unpack it, change perspectives on how to deal with it. When you deal with a lot of people going through different situations, unspeakable stuff, you take it in because it's transferred to you. So I decided that I would probably need a therapist myself. So I actually do have a therapist that I see like every 3 weeks. Yeah. So yeah, your therapist should have a therapist. If your therapist doesn't have a therapist, you got to consider. But because we're humans too. So me going into mental health, that was my perspective of it. Like, so it's just me talking to people, and then, they go about their way, not knowing that, oh my God, this is happening to you. Like, I'm about to cry with you, but I can't. And I got to take notes and have to figure out how to help you, deal with it. And then after I do that, I still have it with me. So I have to transfer it out to another therapist and talk to it. So that's kind of my experience where like I'm in it with them.
I like the way you said that, because it's very much a relationship.
Yeah.
And yes, it has, I guess, a professional foundation, but your therapist really cares about you, genuinely. And they take what you say and we hold on to it like, oh my gosh, and we think about them even when they're not in front of us. And I think that's something people don't realize is we think about our patients a lot, maybe too much. Hence, we have our own therapist. But you think about how to help them and, how do I connect with them? How can I be there? How can I support you? How can I help you? And I hear from a lot of people like, oh, you just talk. You just listen for a living, right? And I do a lot more than that. I do a lot more than that because I'm listening to you and my mind is running. Running through all the research I know, all the interventions, all the theories. I'm trying to find what is a good fit for you.
For you, exactly. And everybody's different. So you're always on your P's and Q's. It's not a textbook thing for like a particular person.
It's more of an art, I think there is the skill sets that you get that are very general, but the art is how do you apply it? And I think that's what I like about it too, because like you said, it's very individualized. And each person can come with depression and I would handle it a different way. Each person has their own kind of plan, Okay, so let's kind of go into this, focusing more on Black men. In your personal life, whether it was before you got into the field or now that you're in the field, do you encounter conversations amongst other Black men about mental health?
Yes, I do. Believe it or not, they really express themselves. You'd be surprised what men think about. Most men have this persona of like, I'm calm, cool, collected. I always have to have this face, even with friends, with family, significant others and stuff like that, because they were kind of like bred to be the kind of anchor where you can't break, because if you break, everything else around you is going to break. So you have to be that anchor, right? And they take that in, literally, where like no crying, no expressing vulnerability, you know. Even as a therapist, like me conditioned as a young man, I still battle those things where I know what I'm doing, but still it's like intrinsic to like, no, don't do that. Like, don't show your emotions, don't show vulnerability. It's one of those things where men feel like it could be used against them, you know. So they always have to have that defense up, you know, until they actually feel safe, where, you know, it's one of those situations, if somebody else is going through it, the same thing that they are, they're more likely to open up, you know. They're more likely to tell them, oh yeah, this is the issue that I've been going through, you know, with, like, let's say, I'll give an example, like intimacy, you know, in bed, like I'm not doing my best, you know, and that's an ego thing. So it's one of those situations, like it's hard to get to that point to open up, but men open up, especially when they feel like they're safe, you know. So having an environment where it's not judgmental, or it's where it's like, because it's not that they want to fix it, they just want to be heard, right? They just want to get somebody that actually gets where they're coming from, like they can relate to them. A guy would be more likely to open up if he finds somebody that can relate to the same issue that he's going through. And I feel like that goes for everybody, but for a man, that's the key to unlock that door, where it's kind of like, oh, so you've been through it too? So how'd you deal with that, man? Like, you know, because like this stuff is going on with me and da da da. Like, oh, okay, so you know, and to unlock that, it varies with men. You know, it just has to be a consistent, safe place. It just has to be a consistent appreciation, because when a man feels appreciated, you know, and not kind of like, hey, what can you do, or like, hey, what are you doing, or how are you doing this, or you should do this for me type situation. It's one of those things where like, oh, you're actually listening to me. Okay, so I guess I'll let you know what I'm feeling, you know. And even if they express it, it's still gonna be hard. Like, yeah, so this happened, and you know, no biggie, and like, but it's being expressed. That's what I've experienced with like patients. But when it comes to other guys, like outside of therapy, it has to be with somebody that's really close, you know, because guys don't typically share emotional stuff with, you know, people that they just hang out with or play ball with, or, you know, work with.
Okay, follow-up question. In those conversations, it kind of sounds like they ask for tips, right? How to resolve the issue. Are coping skills ever discussed? Is therapy ever discussed? Like, hey, I think you should go to this person. I went, it was really good for me.
Oh yeah, most definitely. This is a go-to thing that I express to them. It's one of those things I tell them, like 99 coping skills. You Google it, it pops up right there. It's like 99 things that you can do, you know, to get yourself in a good mind, or to relax, right? To escape, right? It's kind of like a pun off of Jay-Z's, you know, song 99, like 99 coping skills. And
I like
they,
that.
yeah, and that's kind of like an icebreaker in itself. So to the point where, like, you know what just happened to you? You just giggled a little bit. Yeah. So it's an art where it's like, okay, all right, I can relate to that. Then they go to it and they look at it, and there's some things that are really odd on that list, but there are people that practice those things, you know. I refer them to that. I also, you know, especially with people that go through grief, you know, there's a place called Bo's Place. If you're in Houston, Bo's Place, they deal with grief. It's free, you know. It's about 6 weeks. You go in. How it works is you come in initially, they do orientation, and after that, every week you come in, potluck. You bring something, everybody brings something. You guys sit there for the first 15, 20 minutes, eat. Then everybody goes into their separate rooms, like the rooms for men, rooms for women, rooms for children.
Okay, I thought Bold Space was just for children. I didn't know it
Nope.
had all that. Okay,
Yep.
that's good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And it's really good, so those type of resources, because initially people that I know, I can't be their therapist because of a dual relationship. So it's one of those things, like these are the things I kind of refer to other guys. And yeah, men really want to vent and they need somebody to actually trust to do that. Like when you can find no matter how they act out, like if you can get a man to really disclose his like issues and his vulnerabilities, it's one of those things, like that trust, that's something to really actually uh appreciate and hold on to, because that really doesn't happen that much.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. So, mental health is becoming more normalized over like the
Yeah.
past 10 years. People speak
10,
about it more
10 years.
freely.
Mhm.
It's more acceptable. We're still not where we want to be, right? But we're getting there. I'm very confident we'll get there.
We
But
will.
one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed as well, is that African Americans have the highest rates of, no returns. So meaning they come to a session, you know, meet for an hour or so, and you never see them again.
Mm.
And so one of the reasons is like a cultural disconnect, for example. Another reason could be they don't feel like they're being understood. So, for example, when we think about mental health disorders like depression and anxiety, we have certain perspectives of what the disorder looks like or how it shows itself. But we do know that it can be really different depending on who the person is. So, for the Black patients that you've had, have you noticed that their depression or anxiety or their grief looks different than what you're used to?
um Yes. Uh, with African Americans, well, when it comes to depression, like you can't really figure out the cause of depression per se. It's one of those things that just kind of like comes up,
Mhm.
where there's not really a reason for it, but it's there. Now, how you typically see the symptoms, um, when there's no energy to really do anything, you sleep in bed all day, or nothing was really fun for you anymore. Things that used to be fun for you isn't really doing it. Kind of disconnecting from like friendships and relationships, and not wanting to engage as much. But with African Americans, what I've noticed when they do have sessions with me is not being understood, right? And not being, I want to say, heard. Like when they do come, like when I have patients that come to me and say, hey, sometimes I lash out, sometimes I say things I'm not, supposed to say, be out of anger, but it's not that I really feel that way. It's just that, you know, it's the way I deliver it. And that tends to be, oh, you're just angry, you're just aggressive, and you know, you're kind of toxic to be around. But at the end of the day, that's not really the case. It's just a way of lashing out. It's just a way of like expressing their frustration. Um, Somebody that's always combative, that's the that's the label that we get. But there has to be a motivation to that. Like you have to think of like beyond the surface of, why is this person this aggressive? Why is this person messy? Why is this person toxic? Where is it coming from? So if you can ignore the attack, because it's really not about you, it's really about why this is happening, right? That can help more. That's what I see. And just to touch on why they typically don't come back, it's maybe because they feel like they're misrepresented. Like whenever the therapist that they do see don't really relate to them culturally, don't really understand when they say certain things or why they feel a certain way, or they give them like textbook questions like, how does that make you feel? And situation like that's a cliche question that a lot of people don't like, that I've noticed. So it's you just have to meet them where they are when it comes to interaction, right? Where you're having a conversation with somebody and you already know the cultural background. And if you do multicultural, like, research about different cultures and stuff like that, you have to assimilate to that in order for them to be more comfortable to open up to you. For example, sailors, military people, they cuss like off the storm. So when you're sitting there,
Oh, culture. Yeah.
you gotta cuss with them. Like, like somebody like, can you tell this? You know what this said to me? And I'm like, man, what, like one of those situations where you have to make them feel comfortable in order to like, oh, this person can relate to me. You know what? I'm gonna come back in 2 weeks. I'm gonna come back next week because you know what? I got something that I feel like you can help me out with. If they feel like there's no connect, they probably won't come back. And another aspect to it is the cultural thing. Like us as a society doesn't really see mental health as something that's tangible, especially Nigerians and Africans. Like, sorry, I didn't want to say it, but that's real. Like, it's one of those situations where it's like, okay, so you're depressed. Okay, then go do something to make you feel happy, and you like go, like, why it's hard to open up, right? It's hard to express yourself, and we also have to talk about the societal systemic, like, how to put it, the hierarchy of things where therapy typically really is for the rich, Therapy is for the rich. Not everybody has access to therapy, right? So we have resources and stuff like that to actually, cover that gap, but it's hard because we're not getting help from insurance. We're not getting help from laws. We're not getting help from, different acts that can actually make that, like, mental health a thing of necessity, right? So there's not that much resources for it. So if you want to do a therapy session and you don't have insurance, like you're paying $150 to $200 a session.
It's really expensive.
I'm not gonna pay that much money, and I'm a professional. Like off the bat. So it's more like if I don't have insurance, we'll figure it out. So that's another thing why you see a lot of like people that are not represented, like when it comes to like African American society or Hispanic society or like just the minorities that would need access to it don't really get it because like I can't afford it, like I got other bills to pay and this can wait. And that's just like a whole nother, topic. But
but
those are just
mental health. They're real, and you brought up a good point, the finances. That is one of the biggest things. It's really expensive. The best providers or the more skilled providers don't accept insurance because of all the hoops that insurance makes them go through.
That's true.
Because that's the back end, because people think it's about greed. And it's actually not, because insurance really restricts the work that professional can do. Because insurance says, I need a diagnosis on day one. And like,
that's not realistic.
Exactly.
They're like, what?
Like, I just met this person. You want me to give them a label right away?
Yeah,
right?
And
exactly. Then two, they will only pay for certain disorders. Yeah. So if you're coming in with family trauma, that's considered a Z code. Z codes don't get paid. They're like, nope, try again, figure something else out. And so then there's the ethical dilemma of the professional.
Right.
Like, okay,
exactly. Why put this in? Yeah, to actually be congruent with what they're telling me.
Right, that can be compensated for, but it's not too heavy.
Exactly.
And then the payout. You see this person in January, you don't get paid for that session until March.
Yeah.
And so those are some of like the red tape that people don't know on the front end. Like that is one of the reasons why insurance carrying providers are dwindling every year because of those type of antics, right? And so as a result, it is $150, $200. And that's a lot of money, right? Yeah. And it's helpful to have a schedule like weekly or bi-weekly is the preferred schedule to get like the desired benefit. So if you're thinking $400 every month, who can afford that? And so that's one part of it. And then the second part, when you speak about people who are low income, they tend to work shift hours, right? And
Mm.
when you think about it, most professionals are done seeing their last person by like 6 p.m., maybe 7, but that's not too common. But when you think about the work shifts that people who are low SES, when
Hmm.
would they be able to go?
That's true.
So then it's just that too, like the availability. So even if they can go, even if they find, there are some counseling centers that have subsidized payments, right? But even if they can go to those, can they make the hours? There's typically like a waiting period, right? It's
Mm.
really hard to get an appointment because a lot of people are crowding there. And so I do agree with you. The systems, you see, the systems are at play. And even though mental health is important, these systems are preventing people. This is going to be my thing for the rest of our conversation, the systems, because I mean, we just keep talking about them. And
Yeah.
we're gonna stay on the systems because you mentioned something I want to come back to, and that is the views of different types of disorders.
Hmm.
Um, with my patients, I like to say depression has many faces, many faces, right? I mean, we know some people are happy seeming and they're depressed. Well, do we talk about the violent people?
Aggressive? You mean the aggressive people?
Yes.
Woo. Okay.
And that kind of takes me into how African Americans tend to have the more heavy or stigma related diagnosis that tends to skew their understanding of disorder. So let me say that in a better way.
Okay.
African American people are more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Okay.
Schizophrenia is considered a cancer of mental health disorders because of how debilitating it is, not only mentally, physically,
Physically.
financially. They're in and out of inpatient hospitals and medications. They typically deal with a lot of homelessness, for example. And that is
Yeah.
a tag that most African American people get, even though schizophrenia is a rare disease.
Hmm.
And so a lot of research has been done that shows that how Black people express their experiences of depression or anxiety or grief or trauma sounds psychotic, but it's actually not. And when we say sounds, we're talking about what is called the DSM, which is like a
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
book
Five. Yeah.
that
Hmm.
is like a dictionary of mental
Hmm.
health disorders. And it
Yeah.
basically says if a person meets a variation of these
Yeah.
symptoms,
Like 4 symptoms. That's your diagnosis, and
right?
then on the list, yeah.
But that DSM was developed on white men. It was. Am I
That is
right?
true. That
It
is true.
was developed on
Yeah.
white men. And one of the reasons why it's so hard because this is based on how white men experience their mental health.
Hmm.
And white men live in a different system than the Black man does. The systems. And so they're going to have different experiences. They're all valid. They're all valid. But it's going to be a different experience. They're going to have different language to explain that as well, like the language differences and the cultural differences. And so I think that kind of goes into, why a Black child is more likely to be diagnosed with conduct disorder than ADHD or depression, for example.
Yeah.
Because conduct disorder is one of the criteria before we get to a higher adult level disorder, which is still associated with aggression.
Yeah.
Even though aggression or irritation, frustration, emotional ability where they're up and down a lot, right? Unpredictable. Those are signs of depression. But, I guess when it's explained and how Black people are stigmatized, that's how they tend to end up with a different diagnosis. And so that could be, like you were kind of saying, one of the stigmas, because if I go, what's the label I'm going to get?
Yeah.
For example, or if I go and I explain this and they tell me I have schizophrenia, like, what are you talking about? I'm just grieving, for example, because grief can look different for every single person, and when we think about people who experience like neighborhood violence, a lot of loss in their life, for example, the way they grieve is going to look very different. I don't think they get the consideration that they're grieving.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes into, I say all that to say, I do agree with you that relation is so important. And I want to share a really short story about a patient that I had who really
Okay.
changed how I applied therapy. It was a Black male, and have I had one before? I don't think so. I've had Black women. I hadn't had Black men before. I don't think so. But he was sent to me because his children were taken away due to drug dealing at the home. And I started with like my regular, CBT, trying to, change how he saw the world, blah, 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 blah. But there was really a disconnect. I could feel it. He could feel it. And I say that because one day I just asked him, and I'm the therapist who always checks in. So I was like, I just want to have a conversation with you, and I want us to be honest with each other. There's no penalties here, because he was court mandated. So I was like, look, this is not something that's going back to the courts. This is a conversation with me and you. And I was like, is this working for you? And he was like, not really. He was like, I mean, I do what you asked me to do, but you just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Right? And so I decided to try a different aspect, which was kind of relying more on storytelling. So I would just ask him questions like, hey, tell me about this part of your life, tell me about that part of your life, this part, that part. And when I tell you, the transformation was amazing. Like we used to struggle to
For
do
him to
30
open
minute
up,
session.
just to say
Okay,
3 words.
30-minute session. I'm like, look, I have to do at least 30 minutes. And it was a struggle. But when we went to the storytelling, it was hard to keep him to an hour. I was like, hey, I have somebody else. Like, we can't just talk for the whole day. But he really woke up. And from that, I was able to still do the work that I'm trained to do, but I had to do it from a different perspective that really put him in the driver's seat. And I'm an observer. I'm learning about your life. And when I stepped into his world and I saw all the things he's been through as a child, for example, it helped me help him as an adult. And one of the things he said is that you went from standing in front of me telling me what to do to walking beside me and seeing the world as I see it. And I talk about him, when I have my interviews and stuff, because they're like, what case changed you, right? And I'm like, it changed me because we don't get trained for a person like that. We don't. We talk about the person who's addicted to drugs, but we don't talk about the person who deals, because we have seen them as, a miscreant to society. And we forget the systems that results in that person
already
in that
labeled.
situation. Yeah. And so I think the relating is so important, and you don't have to live that life to take a glimpse in. But I think you have to humble yourself to step back and like, what, I'm not the expert. You're the expert of your life. And I'm just here to help you, but kind of taking a step back and allowing that person to share that with you.
Yeah, and that's great that you mentioned that or you told that story, because that's typically my style. Like, I don't ask questions. Like, it's one of those situations where I'm like, hey, you give me 80, I give you 20. Tell me a little bit about your life. What's going on with you? How's your relationship with your sister? How's your relationship with your brother, your family? And kind of like when they open up a little bit and they say certain things, I'm like, oh, that really happened? Word? How'd you play that off? Like, how? And then there's like, oh yeah, so I did this, I did that, and then like my uncle, this and that, and you just let it go. At the point where I'm just like, okay, just listening, because it's one of those things where if you give them, like you said, like you give them the driver's seat, you give them the wheel, and you just let them take you wherever they want, and doing that, you just have to have that rapport where it's like, look, man, just tell me about you. I'm just here to listen. Like, I'm not here to tell you what to do or anything like that. If you just want to talk about random stuff, like, it's between me and you. I don't have to tell anybody, like, what's on your mind. And they just go. They go. Like, I had I have actually. I have a dude trying to get out the game, as in like drug dealer. He's trying to get out the game, but he's having a doing it cold turkey. So he's conflicted. He's like, he just created a business, but in order to funnel that business, he needs to be in the game around. So it's like, it's real life stuff because he's like, yo, I got to feed my kids. I got to support my wife, but I can't do that with just this business. I gotta let it grow because it takes a while. I'm in the red this year, but I still got to sling a little bit, just to get, I'm sitting there like, yeah, I understand that, so you know what their motivation is, and when you humanize the motivation, when you humanize what they're doing based on the motivation, you can easily get them to the point where like, hey, you don't have to do this 100%. Like, he's like, I can't quit cold turkey. Understandable, but can you do this a little bit less though? He's like, I can do that. And it's that's how you gradually get them out of that, So you can't just be like, oh, you do this, that's not okay. You have to be able to like, you know what? I totally get it. Do what you got to do, but do it to a point where nobody gets hurt, you don't get hurt, or just to get your family fed, because that's what your motivation is, right? It's tricky. There's a lot of gray areas.
Yes, there are. And I'm so happy you said humanizing the experience, because we could easily say drug dealing is bad. It messes up communities. I'm going to report you.
Yeah, then weed is legalized in Colorado. And like, these are the times, that's why I said there's a lot of gray areas.
Yes. Systems, because who is dealing the weed in Colorado?
Yeah, you're right. You're not letting the system thing go. Okay.
Because these are the invisible powers at play.
That's true.
They are. And, we can't pretend nothing happens in a vacuum.
That's true.
There's a lot of influence, and we have to acknowledge that, because then, we're criminalizing that person instead of humanizing them.
But look at mainstream, even ketamine and psychedelics are being mainstreamed.
Right.
So it's kind of like, okay, this is where we're going. So we have to be a little bit more open to substances now.
And is there a reason why? Because who's more so affiliated with those drugs, using those drugs?
I know where you're going with this. I won't say it. I'll let you say it. I have to be inclusive at all times.
It's inclusive because we're just discussing, because that would mean that we're not paying attention to systems again, because cocaine and crack cocaine are the same thing.
Well, I mean, they're different.
No,
but
chemically they are the same thing.
Well, technically, yes, they are.
Yes.
But, I mean, it's
when you run your test, they're both going to come up blue, whatever color you're looking for. They're different in their form or presentation. They may be different in lines of purity, and they're also different in who tends to frequent which form.
Yeah. Oh, I got a story for that.
And and if you, before certain laws were changed, if you were caught with cocaine, you were more likely to get less time than if you're caught with crack cocaine.
Mm-hmm. Because of the demographic that actually uses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cocaine was the rich white drug, and crack cocaine was the poor black drug.
That is very true.
And they should just stop doing drugs, even though cocaine is still living its best life. And so, again, those are things to kind of identify, because when we have our patients in the room, we cannot ignore these systems that are at play.
That is true. That's fair.
And you can't say, oh, just stop dealing, or, I mean.
Exactly.
But
yeah,
like,
you can.
But you have to acknowledge
realistic.
that minimum wage cannot sustain a family. We have to acknowledge that certain areas, education has been underfunded to the point that even if a person acquired a high school diploma, it's not worth anything. And so when we think about all of those entities, or certain neighborhoods are crime ridden, for example, it's not safe for them to go to school, things like that. We have to consider all those systems at play. And one, how it affects the mental health, but then also affects the room, the therapeutic room. And when we think about Black people when they come in, I think it's important to consider that because one thing that kind of contributes to the no return is they're seen as overreacting to racial microaggressions, for example. Like, are you sure they meant that? Do you think you're overreacting? Is there
Mm-hmm.
another way to look at that? And I know as therapists, we're kind of trained to present alternative options,
Mm-hmm.
but at times that can be dismissive. One. Two, at times we can put the burden of racism on the person versus, I mean, just being honest and sitting in the discomfort that, yes, you are being oppressed and that is real.
Yeah,
And
that is.
it's very
It's our
difficult.
reality.
Yeah. And when we discuss coping, I don't think people realize that oppression is an ongoing thing. Versus when we talk about coping with traumas that have passed. Like, yes, you had this trauma, but it's not actively presenting itself to you. This is something that has happened, and we're just dealing with the memories or this byproducts of that. But if you're still in the fight,
You
there's
haven't
only
really
so
left
much
it.
coping you can do. And I think that's something that's missed because there aren't a lot of minority therapists that just really sit and like, yeah, it
That's true.
hurts and it's hard. Um, so kind of going back to Black people in the therapeutic room, I was doing some research on Black men, and I found something that was, I don't know if I should categorize it as like sad, interesting, but I found that within the past 20 years, there have only been 19 studies on African American men and
Yeah,
how they
that's
understand depression. And so, with that, there's a limited understanding of how this population deals with something.
mhm.
And in your professional opinion, do you think that is related to the disconnect that sometimes happen? Like sometimes they just don't know how to handle them.
Yeah. I think that has something to do with it. It's one of those situations where not enough work is done to actually understand or research or actually you know I don't know how to put it, how to know how to actually have a conversation with a Black man, right? Uh, like people feel like they always have to think of a certain way to speak to us. People have to feel like they have to use
Dang.
certain phrases. And I'm like, well, why would you say that? Like, why can't you just speak regularly to me, right? So that mindset is there where there's not enough education for them to actually, comfortably interact with us and our issues
Mhm.
because you can't really relate, and it's hard to relate because not a lot of people go through what Black men go through,
Mhm.
right? So, and the fact that enough energy hasn't been done with researching, with surveys and stuff like that, hence the reason why it's avoided. As per like I don't know, like a white man, a white woman, like yeah, we could they have no problems expressing their feelings about a certain situation. Like most of the and to be honest with you, like nowadays, I know it was different in the past. I know we talked about this earlier. When it comes to our field, there's a lot of older white women that run this field to the point where like there's no, and I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but I'm just saying it as this is the reality. So there is no multicultural experience where they can be able to relate to the patients that or the clients that they're seeing to be effective. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
um, there should be a little bit more education. That's true. There should be a little bit more resources poured into like research and surveys and stuff like that that deals with the demographic that we are. You know, I feel like we also have to accept that the fact that mental health isn't really a stigma, you know. And that's something that, you know, I will take responsibility for, as in like, hey, we need to actually look at mental health as something that's tangible, you know. You know, because I know that's the reasoning or the excuse that might be used, that, oh, you know, they don't really come to the research, they don't really. So we shouldn't give them a reason to not make that effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I
that's
think you bring up a good point by identifying limitations in our field. And because multiculturalism training really just started like in
not even,
2005.
yeah, it just started. Like, it's
It just started, and
it's
it's
literally
still
an,
a relatively new place. And so, what that kind of means, like you said, is people who've been in the field for a while, they have not had this training.
Mhm.
And I know with licensure, you know, to get it renewed every whatever the cycle is, multiculturalism is one of the continuing
mandatory.
education courses you
Mhm.
have to take. But
Yeah,
like you mentioned, it's still a restricted amount of information. And there's probably a lot of overgeneralization because in the past 25 years, it's only been 19 articles. And one a year may sound good, but when you realize hundreds of articles are going through every year, is actually not a good thing. And I also like that you mentioned about research. There's a lot of stigma with research in the African American community. And as a mental health researcher, I've definitely had to have a lot of conversations about that. But that is how we learn.
mhm.
And so to improve this field, it's like a dual bag. So professionals have to do their part by getting training and asking questions and doing the research. The community holding their bag have to come and show up for the research. And there's
That's right.
different levels, you know, because people always say Tuskegee or things like that, but most psychological research does not require you to eat anything or take any type of medication.
That's true.
And it's really just self-reports, you know, what are the things you experience? How does this feel? You know, is this related to that? And it's more so storytelling in a more structured way. And I think talking about that and normalizing that process, and at times you get paid too, that really helps us learn because there's no way we can learn. And even though I had that experience with that patient that I mentioned earlier, I am one person. And I worked really hard. I was personally dedicated to this patient because I was like, this is a Black man, and I don't want him to get lost in the system.
Yeah.
Because another clinician probably would have discharged him because he really wasn't, you know, engaged. But I was like, I'm gonna keep working, I'm gonna keep working, I'm gonna keep working. And then we finally, you know, connected and it took off. I remember my supervisor said, she was like, you stayed with him. You did not give up on him. And so I don't say that to boast about myself. I'm just saying like that was not a regular situation
Yeah.
because for court mandated cases, if you don't meet XYZ, you can move on
Hmm.
because there's a long waiting list, like we talked about the systems. And so there's not going to be that person's ability to dedicate themselves to you and keep digging and digging and digging. And so with that, that's not going to be everyone's experience. And so I think I said like it's a dual bag that the field has to do something, but the people have to show up too. Kind of going
Yeah.
back to you said that we do have some power. We definitely
Yeah. We do.
do. Okay, so um, there's still a low number of minority therapists. And like we said, multiculturalism training is still a new thing, but therapy can still be very beneficial. So how do you find a culturally competent therapist? How does a Black man find one?
Uh, Research. You gotta do the homework. You know, uh, like you can't just go to one like website. You can't just, you know, make just one phone call, right? You know, Psychology Today is a good one. You know, but
Mhm.
also word of mouth is great. You know, to be honest with you, it takes an average of 4 therapists that people typically go through to find that one therapist that hits you in the right spot. Like, you know what? I'll bat with you. Like, you know, you understand. Like, so it's more of, it's hard to do that generally, even with across the board of demographics. Now imagine how it is with just one demographic, right? It's harder, because you not only do you have to find somebody that understands your culture, understands your background, and can relate to stuff that you say, then you have to identify, like, hey, even if, yeah, you understand my culture, do we necessarily mesh? There's a humanistic thing in there as well.
Absolutely.
Where, so
because both of your Black doesn't mean it's going to be a match.
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
huge misconception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You look like me, so we must get along. You might be surprised. So, yeah. So it's a battle, but just doing your research and making sure and understanding that that first therapist may not be your last. It might not be that person. But keep an open mind, right? And that's really all you can do at this point, because we're a growing, field when it comes to like minorities being therapists. And it took me a while to find like good friends that are male therapists that are Black that look like me. Like I had to go across the country. Like I got friends in California and New York. Like I found them. Like my colleague was like, hey, I think you might like these guys. And she was a female. I was like, you guys have the same type of vibe, And I just started like DMing like, hey, what's up, bro? Like, and they kind of like, they returned and like, hey, so how was it over there in Texas? I'm like, well, this is what's going on, and it's like, it's crazy, I had to really reach across the nation to actually find therapists that have kind of like the same type of style, mentality as me, that look like me too, that are either married or like in a relationship and have kids, Black man, this and that. So if it's hard for me, it's definitely gonna be hard for the client.
We don't want to discourage people now.
It's not, but you gotta set the proper expectation that the work has to be done on your side as well to actually find something that's really good for you. Yeah. I'm really big on accountability, if you haven't noticed by now.
Yes. Well, I like that, because therapy is for you. And it's not the same as medicine where you go, you get a pill and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Right? It definitely requires work on the person, not necessarily the therapist. The therapist is there to help facilitate by asking questions, guiding, but the real work is done by the person. I like something you said about finding a therapist. So yes, sometimes it does take a couple, so you do want to interview a therapist. But also, I like that you kind of said that therapists have friends. And so I think another way you can find a therapist is, let's say this person is in Baltimore, for the sake of something else, but they see this video and they send you a message. I think it helps if you see a therapist that you're interested in, but you're not in their area, message them and just say, hey, I'm in this area. Do you have any referrals? Because I don't think people know about that. There's kind of like, I think they're used to the medical system. Their insurance, they just assign you and you just go on. But this is really a relationship. And, like you said, it's really proactive. You kind of have to find it. You may have to interview a few people. And like you said, the first person you see may not be your match. And so it helps to kind of ask some questions too. Like, how do you approach this? This is what I'm interested in. Is this your specialty, for example? And I know people typically aren't used to that because the medical model says that you just follow what the doctor says.
Nah, that's not the case.
Okay. Okay. But here, you're kind of more the authority. So it's like, well, what do you need? How can I help you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, what do you need from me?
Right. Exactly. So having like your top 3 things, and when you send the message, say, hey, I'm looking for help with Black fatherhood, stress that word, dealing with family issues, for example, that helps too, to kind of just throw out a few one-liners about what you're looking for. And, most therapists have the ethical grounding that this is not their niche. They won't, see you. And it's no disrespect, it's more so for your betterment. I know someone who I can refer to you who really
Like a
have that
better,
expertise, right? Who can really take care of you versus me and a novice. So I think that can be, a trust. If they refer you, it's not a personal thing, it's more so for you to get the best outcome.
that is true. Yeah.
Nice. Well, Femi, thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thanks
You
for
have a
having me.
private practice.
Yes.
So where can we find you, Black male therapist?
Well, you can you can find me on Instagram. I have two accounts, professional and personal. You can follow me on both. They're both open. So my professional is Sandcastle Psych. It's Sandcastle_Psych. And my personal is Grizzly83 with EEZZLY83. Also, you can find me at www.sandcastlepsych.com. I specialize, it's an umbrella, with PTSD, mood and anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, grief, and I also do industry and organization when it comes to performance or businesses. So by all means, if you need help, I'm located in Katy, Texas, Houston, but I'm here. So yeah, I'm here. We take insurances. We do cash. We currently have Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we're working on Cigna, Humana, United, kind of like the whole works, and TRICARE as well, because I love my military brothers and sisters. So I gotta jump on that too.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much again for your time. Thank you for dropping your gems. Thank you for being present and showing that Black male therapists are here, ready to support, ready to
We
serve.
are. Yeah.
And if you have any more questions about finding a culturally competent therapist, please go to mindsofamelanin.com. There's a whole article there for you and sample questions as well. And again, if you've heard from Femi, you have his information, please reach out to him if you're interested.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is great.